Hey, so the limited time poster offer is over. We got a hugely amazing response, and I'm super, super grateful to everyone who signed up. I have one more favor to ask you. If you're friends with my wife Celeste on Facebook, please, please, please apologize to her on my behalf and remind her that I love her. The envelopes to pack these things are supposed to get here in a few days, and our living room is going to be an absolute circus for a good 2 to 3 days while I'm packing and shipping these things. She puts up with a lot of shit from me, turning our house upside down, me being gone all the time, and she usually just smiles, tells me she'll miss me, she wants me to be safe, and she wants me to have a good time. She is the real hero here, y'all. So thank you, love. In the meantime, the poster promotion is over, but there's still some cool shit on patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto. $1 gets you every episode a day early, $2 gets you access to some audio journals I make, $4 gets a Google Hangout every month, $10 gets a handwritten postcard and picture each month. And last but not least, big shout out to Jay, Lou, and Mr. Bible Pants. Thanks for being new patrons this week. And if Patreon isn't a thing you can do right now, that's totally cool too. I love you dearly for listening each week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hello, dear friends. My name is Callie Wright, and this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. Today, we are going to talk about regret, or maybe. So one of the really, really awful and pervasive myths about trans people transitioning is the regret that happens, right? There's all of these terrible websites that have all of these stories about trans people regretting their transition steps. And the conversation also, of course, always goes to, therefore, trans people shouldn't be able to have hormones. Trans people shouldn't have surgeries. They shouldn't be supported in such because body mutilation, et cetera, et cetera. But the conversation that's never had is the pressure that some trans folks feel to take steps that they might not want to take. Because, you know, you have a very gatekeeping medical community that, you know, they want to say things like, well, we're not going to give you hormones if your goal isn't surgery, or, you know, how can you say you're a woman if you don't want a vagina, and all of those things like that. And that's the conversation that's never had. And that really, I think, is the conversation that needs to be had, is the pressure surrounding the steps that some trans folks feel they need to take to be accepted in who they are, whether or not it's something that they actually want for themselves. So we have a guest who has a relevant story. Her name is Danielle. Welcome, friend.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So why don't you just kind of give me some background? Start from the beginning.
Oh, well, I'm trying to figure out where to start from as a beginning here. So my background, and I'll go specifically on transition here, was a difficult one. I started transition in the summer of 1994, but would not get access to HRT for 15 years for a variety of reasons. A big part was being in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which just wasn't a good place to be back then. However, jumping forward to when I moved to North Carolina in the Raleigh area in 2008, I finally found providers who were better, but that's a low bar by comparison. Yeah, I mean, anyone who's been there kind of gets that. I mean, that is to say, they were willing to write my HRT letter, and they were willing to prescribe HRT, but not very well. As an example, at the time, in 2008, in the Raleigh and Durham area, there were 2 known endocrinologists for HRT, and all of whom were pretty much gatekeepers. The therapist I went to was the better choice. Again, not saying much. She required 3 months before she would write the HRT letter and then make the referral. Was 5 more months to the first appointment after that. So you're looking at 8 months minimum. The other therapist, it turned out, would require a full year before he would write the HRT letter.
And that's just for hormones, right? Because like that's a common thing for surgery, but for hormones, I mean, the yes. WPATH standards I think are pretty hardcore, and the WPATH standards recommends 3 months, which I still think is ridiculous. But wow.
And pointing to the absurdity, that therapist said in my first session, "Oh, I have no problem referring you for HRT, but you have to wait 3 months because that's the rules." Which, you know, it's, as you noted, the standards of care are recommends, not requires.
Right.
But Once I got to the endocrinologist's first appointment, she made me wait to the second appointment, which was 5 months further. So we're talking 13 months in here at this point before she prescribed anything. And then I faced weird HRT approaches, is the best way I can describe it, such as being prescribed doses of like 1 milligram of estradiol, no testosterone blocker, and the doctor insisting that was a moderate dose. It's actually an exceptionally low one. It's very rare that works for anyone.
Wow.
Exactly. It would take, let me think here, approximately 5 years, and until after I'd had vaginoplasty and I went out of state to another doctor before I actually had decent and stable, not changing every 1 to 3 months, HRT regimen.
Wow. And was the surgery the delineating factor there? They're like, well, now that you've done that, we can do the whole thing for you. Was that the thinking?
The doctor I ultimately went to, I don't think felt that way.
Okay.
It was a doctor in Atlanta who actually was very good in operating under an informed consent model. I never saw that doctor before I had that surgery, however. So I can't say for certain how they would have been beforehand. My take is they're better than. And in fact, I wound up going to them because a friend in Atlanta had a similar situation to what I did with other doctors, went to them and got it straightened out. So, in particular, being put on very low estradiol doses after surgery. But one of the other things, going back to that second appointment and the one where that doctor was finally willing to prescribe, that appointment included her telling me, and as best I can quote so many years later, you are paid enough that you have no excuse for not having SRS, and then insisting we have a conversation about my plans for it before she would prescribe anything.
Wow.
Yeah. And do bear in mind, this was 2009. Those providers are still active. However, that area now has informed consent one, so the situation has changed. But it was very, very clear that not wanting that surgery was not an acceptable answer to her. Additionally, there were factors in comparing notes with other patients of that doctor. It was very clear they demanded, I describe it as Stepford wife, which is perhaps a little heavy-handed, but you needed to be very femme when you went to those appointments. That's not me. I wasn't. And as a result, I was put on a much slower path, had much more difficulty with access.
Because you weren't committing fully, quote unquote, because you weren't femme enough. Good God.
I can only theorize as their rationale because they were those type of doctors who weren't exactly ones to explain themselves to their patients, let's say.
I gotcha. This is the rules. This is the deal. If you don't like it, get out kind of thing.
Very much so. And they knew, the two endocrinologists knew, well, we're your only options for 100 or so miles. So the second one I went to was little better. Really the only difference between the first and the second, the first required regular, what's the term? Orchidometer exams, I believe it's called.
That's not a word I've heard before. Help me out.
This is going to be a fun one. Essentially, the device is a set of beads, and they use those in one hand and hold testy in the other and compare the size.
Oh, honey, no.
Exactly.
Oh,
so that first endocrinologist required that regularly.
Why? What?
Again, I have no explanation why, but it was very much, if you don't agree to this. So.
What? I don't, like, if you're really trans, your testicles are supposed to shrink. Like, I don't understand.
I never understood it either. None of my other, and let me think here. I've had a total of 4 doctors. Soon there'll be a 5th because I moved. None of the others have done that. The one I'm going to be going to, where I now live, does not have a reputation for doing that. So why that one did it, I have no idea. But one of the things I found that surgery did was cut a fair amount of the pathologization of it. I was allowed to stop going to therapy all the time. My prior ones had required that until such time as I had vaginoplasty, I had to be in monthly therapy. Didn't matter if it was a decade. No, you can't get out of the regular therapy and keep getting HRT until then.
God. And at this point, were you pretty firm that like you didn't want it? Were you unsure, or, was it hard to tell because of all of the gaslighting involved, or?
That third option, actually, it was hard to tell because there was that constant pressure, plus the fact that I was dealing with providers. One of the points about therapy is, you can explore these feelings, but when they have that kind of control over you, you can't. So I could never have those discussions.
Right. So the pressure made it difficult for you to be honest with your therapist about what you wanted, because it's like, well, if I need to be enabled to pursue the transition goals that I actually want, I have to pretend like I want the ones that they want me to want to get the other stuff. And so you're not having a real honest relationship with your therapist, which that can be dangerous, like legitimately dangerous.
And I will level with you. I had a point in there due to other reasons, due to, in part, changes to my HRT, which was a drastic reduction of it at one point in there, and in part, some issues with my now former marriage, where depression hit me. And I very carefully engineered finding a separate therapist to deal with that, because I knew I couldn't tell the one who I was also dealing with dealing with for my transition, because it would have presented barriers to my transition. Even though by this point, I had transitioned at work, I believe I had actually changed employers to an doing the same work, but to an employer in a different industry altogether, going from university to corporate, a software company, so forth. And so having that withdrawn would have been devastating. I knew, in fact, it would have made the depression situation far worse for me, but still I couldn't tell them because they would refuse to see it that way. I mean, granted, I don't know for sure, but there's a huge risk here.
Yeah. And you're getting this pressure in your marriage too, right?
Yes. There was a lot of pressure there. Unfortunately, due to terms of my divorce settlement, I have to be very cautious what I say.
Sure.
There are clauses regarding that. So the biggest pressures there had to do with remaining firm once I made decisions about surgery, which also took away the ability to make a choice. When I'm in those last days before it and I'm feeling, well, I have doubts, there was pressure to not cancel, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think a lot of the regret situations I had, there's been the discussions of it where they say a lot of it is the lack of acceptance and the social situation. And I think that was part of it. The circumstances that led to my divorce were very much present at the time as I'm recovering from surgery. And it was not a pleasant situation at home, which probably robbed me of any ability to be okay with it and to find my way, because let's be real, when you're having fights all the time, there's not much that's going to go well.
Well, sure. And I just imagine that, you're having an unhappy home life of some variety. I feel like in a lot of ways that poisons your ability to be okay or happy or satisfied with much of anything, whether or not it's the right step. Like it's kind of like before when you were talking about how it was really difficult to tell if it was a thing that you wanted or not because of all of the pressure. Like it's hard to separate the, I have to do this for people to accept me versus I have to do this because it's something that I want and need. I imagine that I imagine that's a similar situation to where, it's like maybe I regret this because of all of these other bad circumstances that are wrapped up into it. Or maybe I regret it because it's actually the wrong thing to do. I imagine it's really hard to separate those out and figure out which is which.
Oh, seriously. And even to this day, almost 2 years outside of my marriage and everything, I can't say for sure what would have happened without it. I have no way to address that question. There's no context I can have. I did. With the divorce, though, I was able to gain a measure of peace, a lot better feelings about it.
I'm curious about, because, in my own experience, I had kind of I wouldn't say it's the perfect sort of like rebirth narrative where like I have surgery, I recover, and then everything's fine. Like it was a lot more difficult than I anticipated it being. I felt like I was well prepared because I read a whole bunch of horror stories online because I wanted to set realistic expectations. And it was really, really difficult for me, but it was never difficult enough in like psychological, emotional, spiritual, whatever circumstances that I questioned whether or not it was the right decision. For me, it was just like, oh my God, I wish this wasn't so fucking hard. But there was never a point where it crossed my mind where like, God, did I really make the right decision here? And so you went through a period of asking that question, like whether or not you did the right thing, right? Yeah.
Yes,
talk to me more about that.
Oh, I had some definite periods. It really hit approximately a month after surgery. Give or take a little, it may have been closer to 3 weeks. As I'm dealing with recovery at home, I had taken a bunch of time off of work. And as I said, it was not a happy home life situation, which undoubtedly contributed to this. But I had a point where I just felt I've made a horrible mistake. And unfortunately, the worst part for me, I think, was the fact that all I got was anger. I lost a lot of friends. There's very few friends I had from before that time that are still there. Also, to be completely honest about what happened during that time, I had I can call it an episode. I didn't understand it at the time. Later, in therapy, I discovered that was a paranoid psychotic break.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, it hit me to that level.
Yeah. It was just brought on by all of the psychological pressure.
Exactly. There was so much going on, including the fact that because of my then employer's non-inclusive insurance and short-term disability, recovery was my vacation that year. Yeah. And some of the home life situations included, I'd had opportunities to go places where it would have been inclusive insurance. I'd have had coverage, but there was opposition at home to that. Mm-hmm. And I will never fully understand why. It's one of those things that's going to be an opening question because pretty much the person who can answer that isn't here and wouldn't anyhow, most likely.
Right. Fair. And so you were getting it from both sides. You weren't being helped out a whole lot at work and weren't being helped out a whole lot at home either.
I was dealing with a number of people still then as friends who are trans people who either desperately wanted it or were very happy with it and were angry that there was someone who didn't and wasn't. And, you know, I try to be sympathetic to their point of view. I kind of get how it happens, but at the same time, this was a very real thing. And it meant a lot of anger being directed at me that did not at all improve the situation. If anything, it furthered it.
Yeah, well, and that was actually going to be my question because I had an experience like that. Or like I posted in a trans support group and like I didn't even say that I regretted my surgery. I just said like, gosh, this is a lot harder than I expected it to be, and I'm kind of struggling with that. And you know, like just sort of venting my feelings. And someone came back like, oh, you should be grateful, blah blah blah. You had access, and like you're not wrong. I should be grateful and I am grateful and I had access to a thing that a lot of people want and can't get. I am super, super grateful for that. But like, that doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to struggle with it. Right. And she was like people are going to see this and trans people are going to lose healthcare because you're like feeding into this narrative of surgery regret. And I'm like, man, like I didn't, first of all, I didn't use the word regret anywhere. I was very clear that like, gosh, like this recovery is just a little bit harder than I thought it was going to be. And I'm kind of struggling with that fact. And I'm looking for support from folks who are supposed to be my people. Right. And it's like you're not allowed to feel anything other than what you're supposed to feel. And it's so, so frustrating.
Honestly, that's something I noticed. There's a thing I've described as kind of the standard trans narrative, which, I mean, we touched on with gatekeeping, but there's also an element of it of the acceptable regrets and acceptable losses and all of that. Mm-hmm. And some of these things, it's just, they're not considered acceptable for us to feel them. And that's a huge problem because it denies us support that in particular times of need.
Yeah. Like, and I feel like it shouldn't be like it shouldn't need to be said that the trans experience can be really complicated. Like,
Seriously.
like 100% happy with the decisions that I have made in transition, but some of them have been very difficult and some of them have involved some serious loss. And like, I'm allowed to say that I made all of the right decisions, but also lament the things that I've lost along the way and not be super stoked on how difficult it was sometimes. Like in my head, that seems so obvious. Like it seems just absolutely the most obvious thing that you could say about like trans people's lives is that like sometimes it just shit gets super, super complicated, but like, I don't know. And it's, when we're talking to cis people, maybe that's understandable because, you know, human beings in general have the tendency to think of groups as a monolith. But like even in the trans community, we still run into that, right? Like obviously, you know, that's a different conversation. But you know, we run into that even with people of similar experience, like trans women. Like it's it's really angering.
It is. It's an incredibly frustrating thing. It's an issue that, as the overarching community, so much as that's a valid word to use, there's legit questions about that. It's a problem that has to be addressed. And what you said exactly about, I had a situation where I lost some family in this. No one's surprised by that. It was painful. I wouldn't have changed what I did. I wouldn't give up my transition. I realized it was still worth it, but it still hurt.
Mm-hmm. And so talk to me about coming out on the other side of that. So because I know for a while, you know, I saw you posting on Facebook a lot about how like, you know, I don't feel like this is the right decision. And I feel like I can't talk about this. And I have, you know, all of these negative feelings about it for all of these reasons. And then, you know, when we talked about doing this interview, you said you were kind of in a different place now. So talk me through that journey.
Well, that's a weird one. It had to do with my divorce. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize how much of a bad situation my marriage was. Mm-hmm. I began to understand it probably about 3 years ago, but it wasn't until I was out of it that I fully did. And I think that's kind of understandable in a lot of ways. And so the anniversary, let me think, doing the math here, I think it was the 4th anniversary of surgery for me, was approximately 6 months after the separation. Now, as a quick aside, I lived in North Carolina at the time, which had a 1-year separation period requirement before you were allowed to even file for divorce. So I was approximately halfway through that at the time, living on my own, living in downtown Raleigh. My ex lived in an adjacent city. And I got to live my life, and I got to decide, here's who I am without it being involving this other person intimately in my day-to-day life. And I spent some time I will say for that period, one of the best things I did was get myself into therapy 3 years ago to deal with the divorce things. And I hit a point there as the anniversary approached. I had a lot of mixed feelings, but I just decided it's time I took this for myself, and I made it a thing for myself. So I had the rebirthday party. We met at a interesting, honestly, kind of hipsterish restaurant in downtown Raleigh, about a dozen or so friends. And it was the single best thing I did to reclaim that for myself. Because one of the things I did remember in those days immediately after surgery, while dealing with, as you said, some stuff that was really hard. I mean, it is major surgery. There's parts of it that's going to suck. That's just a fact of life. Mm-hmm. There was happiness I felt. And I decided I needed to try to access that again. I needed to see if I can get back to that.
Yeah. Tell me about those bits of happiness. Can you be more specific about like what those bits of happiness were?
It's hard for me to describe because it was a non-specific sense. It actually began just before I flew. I had my surgery with Broussard in Montreal. So I flew from Raleigh to Montreal. The evening before, I began to feel happy, even euphoric a bit. And that carried through until after I had returned. And here's where part of where that sense of regret, but also happiness can coexist. On the flight home, the second leg of the flight, It was from Toronto to Raleigh. Not many people on the aircraft. My then wife was next to me and asleep. And I had a moment. I just was overcome with a sense. Joy is the only word I can use to describe it, but it was more than that. Mm-hmm. I started crying and I said, it's really over. No, they can't take it away from me. This is something they can't do. It's something I have accomplished. Now I've permanently secured this for myself. And there was a happiness in that honestly continued probably for a week or two more at home. And so it was that I sought to reconnect with, not specifically okay, I've bested the gatekeepers, but the happiness I felt.
Yeah.
And I wish I could put it into more concrete terms. I just do not have them for what that was.
No, that makes total sense. That actually tracks a lot with some of the feelings that I had. It was just like so much of my life up to this point has been about this thing, and oh my God, it's happening. And so yes. Like people talk about being nervous and they're like, I shouldn't be nervous for this. And I'm like, being nervous about it doesn't mean that like you're doubting whether or not it's the right decision. It just means that you understand what a big fucking deal it is. You know what I mean? Like, yes, and that's okay. Yeah. But no, that actually really tracks with that, because I would have moments like that, even, in the difficulty of my own recovery and, how much pain I was in and how like difficult things were. I would have moments where it's like, right after the pain meds kicked in, or like if I found a certain way to lay where the pain went to like sort of a dull ache and, and like everybody in the house is asleep, the TV's off, there's just enough light for me to see outside. And I was able to just kind of sit there and just kind of like, wow, this is real. This is a thing that actually happened. And so like the context is different. So I'm sure it's not exactly the same feeling, but I can definitely empathize with that.
I mean, one of the things to give you an idea of what my home life was like, and it's one of the few things I can say in spite of those agreements, because I actually have proof that this was said. Mm-hmm. In the course of negotiating our separation agreement, what's called a separation agreement and property settlement, which in North Carolina it's everything except the divorce decree. Mm-hmm. My ex wanted me to repay the cost of my surgery. She felt owed that.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a tough situation in very many ways. I was dealing in a home situation that was not conducive to success for this.
Well, yeah. And I feel like, that just poisons literally everything about your life. Like I imagine it'd be difficult to feel happy about much of anything in a situation like that.
Exactly. I often wondered if, there was a anger that I was happy. The best way I can describe it is I was living with a very angry person.
Yeah, no, I get that. I actually, I had an ex tell me once that part of the reason she was so mad at me is that like I get to go and live this happy and amazing life and she's left with nothing. And like I just had to explain, it's like, well, I didn't just luck into this. Like I work on my relationships with people and I put effort into people and I do things with people. Like this, it's not just like, oh, luck of the draw, I get to be happy and your life sucks. Like that's not how this works.
Indeed. And an analog in my own had to do with professional advancement relative between the two of us.
Yeah.
As well.
And so you had this rebirthday party, right? And then so this is a big turning point for you. Yeah.
It was. It was more so than I expected. It did things for me that I really wouldn't understand until a couple months later. But it became, I seized that thing for myself. I made it mine, that I had the right to be happy about it, and I was going to be happy about it. As I worked through the divorce, as you can probably imagine, I was with this person for 21 years and married for 17. As much as it was I needed to be out of it, there were a lot of emotions to work through.
Sure.
And I think I kind of bundled a lot of it into it because I realized this is my chance to make my life better, to have a happier life than I have had to date. And what did I want my life to be? And that one becomes an opening question, but happiness with having had surgery was a big part of it. Even if it's not, I can say it was definitely the right decision ultimately. Mm-hmm. I can be okay with it. I can be happy with it. And I will add, there were some things that also were bonuses. North Carolina, for example, required, in an interesting fashion, required proof of surgery to be able to update the gender marker on your driver's license. Part of it was the tie-in to the Social Security system, and at that time, Social Security still required. In fact, I updated my gender marker with the Social Security Administration 2 days before they changed that policy.
Oh, wow.
Yes. It was June of 2013. And most of us had heard nothing about it in advance. I get it updated, and then 2 days later I hear, oh, we're changing this. Okay.
Right on.
But I was able to get, the only thing I haven't updated yet was my birth certificate. But, I have my ID, my Social Security record, my passport all updated. Birth certificate's not as important a thing in that situation.
And so talk to me about how you're feeling today. I mean, you're some months out from this.
Yeah, so this coming December will mean 2 years since the separation. The anniversary when I had that rebirthday party was approaching a year and a half ago. It was May of last year. Plus, it's not so much an active thought to me now. It's something that's kind of faded more into the background. I'm okay with it. My biggest feelings about it are, I didn't get a bad result. I didn't have severe complications with that. But as far as things like sensitivity go in that, I didn't get a spectacular result. Mm-hmm. It took a long time to regain the feeling, was a big part of it. And to gain function, too. But that has improved. I think some of it actually has to do with my divorce and emotional, mental state relating to it.
I was just about to say, when you were talking about that, I was like, gosh, you could very easily be talking about the physical sensation of your surgery or like your psychological state.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Exactly. And in fact, one of those weird moments I noticed was I wasn't sure about physical sensation available, because for a long time, I mean, the only touch that I really had there was of my own doing. It was the dilators, it was stuff like that, but it was also my own hands. And one of the weird things I discovered I have with that is, if I'm getting the sensation from my finger and from another part of my body, or just my finger, I can't quite tell them apart. My brain kind of fills in the gaps.
Right.
Have someone else touch me though, and I know.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. You have been on quite a journey, my friend, and I am super stoked that you are now in a better place than you were before, and you deserve it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Do you have anything to plug? Do you have any creative projects or anything to plug? I always like to give folks a chance.
No, I don't have anything that's really of the sort. I'm kind of enjoying a more quiet life right now. I'm job hunting because I took a little bit of time off. I built up some funds, and when I moved to Houston, I realized I had been horribly burnt out for several years, so I needed to take a break because, running right into, and I'm a system administrator, do DevOps work, so it's the kind of stuff where burnout can easily happen.
Sure.
And
just living life.
Exactly. I don't have any of those kind of projects. I'm just one of those people who kind of wants to quietly live a life over here.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it. Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gaytheist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter. You can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. We are a part of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative, or a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. If you want to support the show and everything we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.